The other thing about presence that I wanted to talk about, or I've been thinking about, I want to talk about, is to do with a kind of analogy between presence in, I'm not sure if I mean in a theatrical sense, but presence in a physical embodied sense, and the feeling of being present, the opposite of dissociation, and telepresence, which is to do with technological kind of virtual technologies that allows telepresence. There's two sets of findings which I think it's really interesting to put alongside one another. The first is to do with telepresence. And I think it's been found that in experiments with virtual reality equipment in which participants are asked to perform some kind of physical activity in a virtual environment, a bit like playing a video game, that their ability to perform that physical task, that virtually physical task, to a higher level is partly dependent upon their experience that they are truly telepresent, that their kind of belief, if you like, that they are in this virtual environment really doing the things that they're doing. Belief isn't quite the right word actually, but I'm struggling with what the right language would be. The more they're able to kind of forget the fact that they're playing a game, the fact that they're in a virtual environment, the more likely they are to be good at playing those games. And conversely, if they're constantly aware, or even sporadically aware of the fact that they're really sitting in a lab with a virtual reality helmet on, doing something with a handset, then they're likely to underperform. So there's a correlation there between optimal performance or excellence in performance and the ability to project oneself into a telepresent environment. That's the first set of findings. The second, and which I think related set of data, comes from research into elite athletes. And from my understanding, at the top level of pretty much any athletic activity, and I know this has been carried out, these studies have been carried out with Olympic pistol shooting marksmen, weightlifters, I think people who do kendo, martial arts, I think people who do archery as well. A number of different sports have been tested in it anyway. One of the things that's been found with that, I'm going to let this train go past so you won't hear a thing. One of the things that's been found with looking at elite athletes is that at the absolute top of their game, at the top of the activity, there's very little physical difference, or an irrelevant level of physical difference between the top flight players. The top 5, 10, 20 athletes in the world in any particular sport are, to all intents and purposes, physically equivalent. By which I mean that the amount of variation in any one of their activities is likely to be greater than the variation across the group. So to all intents and purposes, they have the same level of ability. What wins or loses on the day, apparently, is not their physical acuity, but their mental state. At the top level of the game, it's a mind game, is how it's usually described, which is why there's so much investment in sports psychology. But one of the things that comes out of that is there's another correlation being found there, which I think parallels the one I spoke about a moment ago to do with performance and telepresence. There's a correlation in athletics and sport to do with the ability to feel oneself completely associated with the activity one is doing. They call it being in the zone. Elsewhere it might be referred to as unself-conscious engrossment, which is a term that Irving Goffman uses. Or it might be called, what else? Well, Nike have it in their adverts when they say just do it. The idea is there is just the activity being done. There isn't any kind of doer, self-conscious actor in that role. The train. I think there's also a correlation with that with certain brain studies to do with alpha waves or something, but I'm not sure that's relevant to what I'm talking about here. But as I say, there is quite a strong finding that the extent to which one can absorb oneself or enter a state of flow or be in the zone or be unself-consciously engrossed is also correlates with high levels of achievement. And conversely, as I said before, if you're not able to get in the zone, if you are self-conscious, if you're not able to enter a flow state, if you're not able to be absorbed, if you are always kind of self-aware, then your achievement suffers as a result. So there's two findings there, and I'm trying to think of what the relationships are between them. One of the ways in which I'm thinking about it is in terms of how that might be, how those kind of might be placed together. I mean, one way I'm thinking about it is the notion that the body itself is a kind of vehicle for telepresence. It relies on a dualist understanding, which is perhaps what I'll come back to, but to the extent that one is able to, like an elite sports person, that one is able to absorb oneself into the activity, it's almost as if you're seeing your body as this vehicle of telepresence and then completely absorbing oneself within that vehicle. In the same way that using a virtual reality setup, one sees the world one enters and the avatar, presumably the one is inhabiting in that world, as oneself and completely enters that avatar. It requires the initial kind of acknowledgement of a dualism, and then the submergence, if that's a word, submerging, of that dualism within a new kind of absorbed, non-dual flow state in that new condition. So I think what's happening there in both those ideas, most clearly in telepresence, which is a kind of enactment of dualism, in which there is a body outside of the experience, and then the body enters into the experience. So there's a sense of self, which is quite clearly detached from the virtual environment in which one enters and feels absorbed within. But there's also a sense in the state of athletes, in which again there's a kind of phenomenological dualism which precedes the entering into a state in which that dualism is erased in favour of a total absorption with the activity. A bit like Zen and archery, I guess, where you become the bow, you become the arrow, you become the target, you become the flight of the arrow towards the target.